It is one of the most frustrating human experiences. You do the messy, grueling work of updating yourself, changing, growing, trying to make improvements to the way that you live your life, only to find the people around you are still interacting with the person that you used to be. This is especially true in repairing romantic relationships. So in this video, I want to break down why people struggle to believe that you can change, why when you do change, it actually becomes more difficult to change. And then I want to break down how it's possible to get someone to believe that you have changed. So I see this a lot when people are wanting to change, wanting to grow, wanting to improve themselves. As soon as they start to do it, the people around them can struggle to believe it. And this makes changing, growing, changing the dynamics, changing your environment even more difficult. The world around you can often feel like it's pushing back against your change. And this can make it even more difficult to try to make that growth. In this part, I want to talk about the psychology of skepticism. So it is a normal human trait for the brain to resist updating its mental model of you. One of the main reasons why people around you don't believe that you can change, specifically if you're in a romantic relationship, your partner, but other people as well, is because the human brain has a lot of shortcuts. This is confirmation bias. So the human brain is fundamentally built for efficiency. If you think about you are hungry, your brain doesn't tally up every single possible iteration of everything that you could possibly do right this minute. It sends you a signal, it says you're hungry, and then it sends you a signal to say, go get some food. It is just working in an efficient way in order to achieve the thing that it needs to achieve in that moment. Because our brains are built for efficiency, once someone creates a mental model of who you are, they can lock in this character profile. And this has a filtering effect on the way that they see you. So when you start to change, when you start to grow and you change the things that you do, if there's any inkling of the person that they have in their mind, their brain immediately fires off. And they're like, same old story. So their brain is hypervigilantly looking for evidence that you're the same person. But the inverse is also true, is that they can develop blind spots. So when you handle a situation in a totally new, mature, different, better way, they might not register it because it doesn't fit the existing narrative that they hold about you. So this is perfectly normal. Our brains are built to look for evidence to support our existing view and filter out counter evidence to that view. Doesn't mean that it stays that way forever, because eventually our brains will catch up. But our brains are naturally selective to look for the things that support our view. If you've upset someone multiple times, you spoke really badly to them, you got angry with them, you raised your voice, or they had a negative perception of you in the first place, their brains are going to look for the evidence that you're still the same person that they experienced. And this is really important, that they can build a picture of you that can stick around in their mind. There's also this emotional self-preservation. When it comes to relationships, dynamics, trust is an emotional investment, and skepticism is kind of a shield. So if your past behavior caused friction, stress, heartbreak, frustration, annoyance, believing that you have changed requires the other person to lower their defenses. So skepticism allows them to stay guarded so they don't get burned again if your change turns out to be temporary or worse, fake. And this is one of the biggest fears that I see in repairing relationships, is this fear that this change is temporary and this change is just there to manipulate. But that's not the only reason why our brains are designed to not see growth. There's this dilemma of invisible work. So internal shifts, changing the way that you see the world, these are the real growth changes. Changing the way that you see the world, the way that you deal with the world, the way that you deal with conflict, etc. All of these internal shifts happen long before any external results show up. If you think about a business, when you change the processes within a business, they don't instantly cause more profit. There's a lot of time while these processes start to make those changes within the business before the company starts to turn profit. So the internal shifts of any system happens long before any outcomes show up. People don't see the internal processes. People don't see that internal silent work. If you go to therapy, they don't see that. If you journal, they don't see that. If you sit there and practice your communication skills and things like that, they don't see that. So the work that's really important, the internal shifting, is often done in silence. When real change is happening and you're making the difficult choices, you're doing all of this without anybody looking. And people only see the results. So until those results, that output, shows up with rock solid consistency over a long period, people are always going to assume that the old patterns are still running the show. And this is really important to understand, is that once people see a pattern, it takes a lot longer for a new pattern to show up before they start to internally register it in their mind. So there's always a lag, which I've spoken about on this channel before, which I'll link to on the screen and in the description down below. There's a lag. Our brains will always lag behind no matter what. Even if you changed 180 degrees in one day, there will always be a lag before that change is felt. The next thing is the actor-observer bias. In short, psychologically, we tend to judge ourselves by our intentions, what we want to happen, what we're trying to do, and we judge others by their character. When we mess up, we understand that it's because of the circumstances. I was overwhelmed, I was exhausted, but my intent was there. My intent was to turn up to work on time, but traffic was really bad. We often give ourselves the excuse that the external circumstances have an influence on our intent. So I intended to get to work, external circumstances happened, and that's why I was late. But when others mess up, when others do things that we don't like, we assume that it's their character. So they turned up late for work, not because the traffic was late, that was an excuse. They turned up late for work because they don't care about work, because they're lazy. They're an unreliable person, they're selfish. So the actor-observer bias is explaining away what we do based on the external circumstances and believing what other people do is a character thing. So when we try to change, oftentimes this bias can start to raise its ugly head, where our intent is to change and to grow, and oftentimes it can be seen as manipulative, as a lie, or as selfish. But most of all, in relationships, there is kind of a relational equilibrium. So relationships run on implicit rules. They may not be spoken, but they're kind of implied through different actions. There's like an unwritten rule. We fall into a familiar role and a predictable dynamic. So if you suddenly stop being the person who avoids conflict and actually starts to raise questions or raise concerns, or if you stop being the hothead, the angry person, or you stop being the people pleaser, or whatever it is, the entire ecosystem shifts within the relationship. So sometimes people's skepticism, especially when you're trying to repair a relationship, is a subconscious attempt to pull you back into a role that was comfortable and predictable for them. So even if you can see sometimes with incredibly toxic relationships, even if you acted terribly, it can be easier for another person to know that you're going to act terribly because they've come up with tools to help themselves deal with that. It can be more comfortable to see that happening than to have something that is unknown to them. Because if you think about it, let's say you were angry 99 times out of 100, but then you suddenly stop being angry and you start to become calm. Think about from somebody else's perspective how uncomfortable that is. If they've got 99 reasons to think that you are an angry person, then there's this one time, suddenly the hypervigilance goes up and it's like, oh, okay, what's going to happen now? This is actually worse than I ever thought, because at least when they were angry, I knew how to deal with it. I could walk away, I could ignore it, I could shout back. This is new and uncomfortable, and I'm kind of scared of this now. So oftentimes, and this is what expectancy bias is, when our brains have an expectation of how you're going to act, oftentimes we can subconsciously try to pull you back into that role. And you can see this happen not just in romantic relationships, but family relationships, relationships at work. Think about, for example, let's say you have a family member who you never see for the whole of the year. They turn up to Christmas dinner, family dinner, holiday dinner, whatever it is, and they can talk to you and still see you as the person that they knew a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, the last time they saw you. Sometimes you can have family members who still see you as a 5-year-old child rather than the 30-year-old person that you are now, and they will treat you that way and they will see you that way because all of the evidence that they've experienced has been with this one version of you. So this 5-year-old child who used to throw toys at their sister or something like that. But also in romantic relationships, this is obviously what a lot of what I deal with is members who are in romantic relationships where their partner has seen them be a certain way for so long, they start to make deep changes and their partner is extremely skeptical. And if you think about it, this makes sense. If you were wanting to be in a long-term relationship with someone, that is not investing 6 months, 8 months, 12 months. The hope is that you're going to invest the rest of your life with them. So if you've seen them be one way for years and they start to change, you're going to need to see a lot of consistency, a lot of doing things very different. You're going to need to see a distinct lack of counter evidence in order for you to believe that they have changed, that they are capable of changing, and that the rest of the life relationship is going to be potentially different. This is exactly what I do with members, is being able to find the pattern of consistency of how you show up day to day, rather than trying to have some big grand gesture to repair a relationship. And this can be the hardest thing to wrap your mind around, is understanding the many, many small steps that it takes to repair trust rather than one specific action. And if you want to join us and start that journey too, then join my relationship bootcamp. This is where all of my members start learning the fundamentals of changing the dynamics of relationships. I'll drop a link in the description if you want to grab your spot. You know, when trust is chipped away over time, skepticism acts as an armor. So your partner can be afraid to relax because relaxing in the past led to disappointment. So this is normal and this happens all the time. We do it as much as other people do it. So believing that someone can change is very difficult for our brains to do because it takes a lot of cognitive energy. So now I want to talk about why in relationships specifically, it can make it harder to grow. So the first one is an asymmetry of time. So there's a massive mathematical mismatch between breaking trust and rebuilding it. So you may have heard that it takes 1 second to break trust, it takes a lifetime to rebuild it, or something along those lines. Breakdown in trust is usually very, very quick. It only takes a split second of raising your voice, of shouting, of worse. It only takes 1 split second to break trust. But to rebuild it, it is often glacial, very, very slow. So it takes 5 seconds to destroy a boundary or your reputation, but months or years to reconstruct it. So when it comes to you changing, expecting someone to match the speed of your internal breakthrough with the speed of their forgiveness is completely unfair. Something that I see all the time when it comes to repairing relationships is a partner becomes very skeptical. And the amount of times that members have heard, you haven't changed at all, you're still the same person. The difference is that how you handle it, how you deal with that will either confirm that you have changed or that you haven't changed at all. But most of all, especially when it comes to relationships, the biggest challenge is internalized skepticism. The hardest person to convince isn't your partner, isn't your friends, your family, your boss, it's yourself. If you carry underlying shame or guilt about who you used to be, you can project that self-doubt onto others. So when your partner, for example, acts skeptical, if you carry all this guilt and shame, then that means that you can get very defensive, which adds evidence to this pile of, see, they haven't changed. So changing is also about changing your perception of yourself. So this brings us to, what do we do? How do we get someone to understand and believe that we have changed? There are more internal shifts that I want to talk about, which are going to help you push through the difficult messiness of changing. So it's important to reframe the way that you see the world and build a mindset that allows for growth. So the very first mindset shift is for you to actively seek proof of change. So if you only consume stories, media, news, and TikToks of people failing, relapsing, betraying each other, your brain is going to assume that change is a myth. You need to find the evidence for yourself that people are capable of changing and growing. If you only look for evidence that people are incapable of change, then that's all you will see in the world. So intentionally look for examples of real transformation. Look for examples of people who broke intergenerational trauma, who overcame severe addiction, who built healthy marriages after toxic pasts, or completely redirected the way that they saw things and did things. There are so many examples out there. Get into the habit of celebrating that, reminding yourself, human beings transform all the time. It is biologically and psychologically documented that change can happen. So that's the first shift, is finding examples of that. But the second shift is to audit the unseen effort. So when you see someone who has successfully changed, don't just admire the end result, interrogate the process. So asking yourself, what unglamorous, boring, painful work did they have to do behind closed doors when no one was watching? This helps you to realize that change requires hundreds of invisible, private choices that help you appreciate the difficulty of the process. And this is going to allow you to start to respect it when you see others trying. And this is really important, is that once you start to find the effort that other people put in, it allows you to build that evidence for yourself, and you can celebrate the effort rather than the outcome. But the next shift is the ultimate reality check for personal growth. Ask yourself, do I allow other people to change, or do I push back? Do I freeze them at the worst mistake that they ever made? If you write people off, blame their character, hold grudges, and assume that people never change, then you are building a worldview that traps you as well. So if you don't grant others the grace to evolve, then you can't logically expect them to grant it to you. But most of all, it's important to shift away from proving that you've changed to simply embodying that change. So when people don't believe that you have changed, the gut reaction, and I get it, is to argue, is to over-explain, is to defend yourself, or demand that they notice that you've changed. This can be especially prevalent when it comes to trying to repair a relationship with a partner or an ex-partner, trying to shout it from the rooftops to get them to notice. But shifting away from that and realizing that a PR campaign doesn't rebuild trust. If you think about companies, when they screw up really badly and they put out this beautifully written PR campaign about how they're going to do better, that doesn't rebuild trust. What rebuilds trust, if that ever happens, is the quiet, boring consistency. When you stop trying to convince people that the house is built and you just keep on laying bricks down every single day, eventually the structure becomes impossible to ignore. And this takes a lot of consistency, a lot of showing up in the right ways. So spending your time trying to convince family members, friends, partner, that you're different, that you're changed, that you're growing, putting in that work for somebody else is only going to leave you disappointed. If you're putting in that work, then all you're going to do is spend your time trying to convince them that you've changed. And then if they don't see it, you're going to feel disappointed and you're going to feel demotivated to change. Putting that work in for yourself usually persuades them more than any words that you can say. The more that you do the change for you, make the changes and growth because it's important to you, the less defensive you'll be, the less you'll push back, the less you'll try to get into a PR campaign, and the more that your actions will speak louder than your words. So you can't logic someone into trusting you. You can only outlive their old memory of you. Letting go of other people's opinions doesn't mean that you don't care about them, but letting go of what they think of you is really important in order to skyrocket your growth so that you can focus on what's important, which is showing up as the person that you want to be rather than trying to persuade someone that you are that person. I've done a deeper dive video on this, which I'll link to on the screen. Remaining steady in your changes is often the action that is most difficult, but is going to have the biggest impact. Counterintuitively, especially if you're trying to repair a relationship, this is what builds the trust that eventually will repair that relationship long term. So I won't dig into it here. I'll leave you with that deeper dive video and I'll see you over there.